Hi everybody, nice to see you today. So I want to talk a little bit about what we can expect in the next year from the Ethereum ecosystem and a little bit about how we got here. So to me, the last year has been largely about integration into the mainstream financial services world. Many of the banks have Ethereum prototypes. Government regulators are comfortable enough with Ethereum that they're beginning to understand that smart contracts are not any kind of threat. And I think there is a general ongoing step towards a world in which it is simply expected that certain kinds of financial products will be carried on blockchains, initially internal blockchains, and in the long run it would be reasonable to expect the public chain. And I think for a new technology that represents an amazing amount of progress. A very, very fast integration with the existing systems while not losing the radical vision of a different kind of a world. So well done on that. In the next year, I think the same kind of integration that we've seen into the financial system will come to the Internet of Things, it will come to energy, it may come to some degree to robots. We're already beginning to see this kind of general assent that there is some kind of deep harmony between blockchains and decentralized energy grids. And decentralization of energy is something very dear to my heart. I spent many years working at Rocky Mountain Institute, including on a book called Small is Profitable, which at the time was the great tome on decentralized energy. And it's very obvious to me from those perspectives that the blockchain and the decentralized energy networks have very, very convergent needs. So I think everybody working in that field is working in very much the right kind of an area. And I would be very unsurprised if we saw some truly revolutionary products emerge over the next year or two. I want to talk a little bit about the ICO markets. The ICO markets are extremely exciting. I mean, there's no doubt at all that as engines for innovation, it's a faster, easier way of putting real money behind incredibly complicated new technology than anything that Silicon Valley has been able to produce. The problem is, of course, that the regulators are in a very difficult position relative to the ICO markets because we're simply in uncharted territory. People are making the computers do things while the legal and regulatory framework lag behind attempting to understand what's happening. So my hope for the ICO markets is that people will be extremely well behaved and well disciplined so that there isn't an enormous mess for regulators to clean up. If they are effectively self-governing and there is very low or zero incidence of outright fraud, if people tell the truth and keep their promises, I think when the time comes to make a final settlement with the regulators, it may be possible to do it in a way that preserves a lot of the vigour and a lot of the enthusiasm of those markets. If that turns out not to be possible, it will be a huge loss for all of us. So basically the price of freedom is being effectively self-governing. I really, really want people to take that as a serious message, figure out how to keep those markets clean, and it may protect the entire ecosystem. Other things I think would be worth discussing in the context of what's happening today. Ether is enormously valuable. Well done. I mean, that's an astonishing breakthrough. Not so much because it's nice to have a token that's hovering around $100, not because it's made a bunch of the early actors very, very wealthy, but because it funds the innovation ecosystem. The ongoing march of technology is a partnership between capital and talent. If you can't get things funded, you can't do the research, you can't create the products, you can't create the futures. And unfortunately, the vast majority of the funding in the world is in the hands of entities which lack the enthusiasm and lack the experience to be able to assess most of the most exciting technologies. We're in a position where there's been an innovation bottleneck, and that innovation bottleneck is decisively being blown open right now by the blockchain ecosystem. And my hope is that you'll see a second, a third, a fourth generation of these technologies and the companies that are carried along with them branching out from the blockchain into all of the other areas that are adjacent. The self-driving, self-owning car, all the way through to merging blockchains with AI. That entire terrain is wide open, and the ability to invest in those kind of revolutions is critical to the ability of these technologies to progress. On a personal note, I'm pursuing a fund to invest in that kind of stuff myself in a very conventional kind of dull grey suit manner, which might be a little conservative, but that's how London rolls. It moves a little less quickly than New York. Other things that I think would be worth thinking about today. The world is changing very, very rapidly at a political level. The Indian system for biometric ID cards has something like 1 billion people enrolled. And that parallels the enormously rapid growth of things like mobile phones, but with a very strong central authority behind it. We all know that identity is one of the kind of killer apps for blockchain, but we still don't have a completely clear vision about how that stuff is going to integrate into the real world. And that, I think, is the real theme for me of watching the blockchain ecosystem explode. We see this continual challenge where blockchain technology runs forward into contact with something old and brings a set of revolutionary new options to the table. We've seen it for finance, we've seen it for energy systems, I'm sure we're going to see it for identity. I think it's going to happen for cloud computing with some kind of merger of blockchain and cloud computing into some kind of new structure. I would be unsurprised to see Microsoft at the front of that. But all of that stuff, as it moves forward, continues to have this kind of repeating template of the old world and the new world meet. And the new world kind of gives all of these new options for the fluid, precise management of property. You know, how long before we see the Airbnbs, the Ubers, the eBays begin to be transformed by these kind of technologies? Even if it's as simple as adding digital signatures to responses so that you can make these things first-class actors through oracles, even if those are the only steps which are made by the big players, it's still enough to begin to bring those products and services into a blockchain environment. And that's really only a question of putting digital signatures on receipts. So, you know, a year from now, could we see a situation in which most large companies have a blockchain oracle which is attached directly to their receipt system so that it's possible for you to prove that you've completed a transaction on something like eBay and bring that information into a blockchain? That would be extremely exciting, and I think technically those kind of steps are quite feasible, maybe surprisingly so. So with all that said and done, let's talk about the big steps in the future. We all know that as the Ethereum blockchain becomes more populous, transactions will begin to slow down. We see the enormous agony of scaling Bitcoin, and we're making much better progress than those guys are on scaling, but it's by no means a done deal. Similarly, the transition to proof of stake, you know, for environmental reasons alone, it would be really nice not to be mining on the scale that we're mining. Those kind of fundamental transitions are going to require a lot of cohesion from the community to make work. People are going to have to work together, and they're going to have to be quite accommodating if we're going to be able to make those transitions and not have it be an enormous mess. Nobody wants the kind of screaming match that we've seen inside of the Bitcoin world around these kind of issues. What we want is intelligent debate and strong cohesion around those transformations when the steps need to be made. I am less involved with the technical side of Ethereum than I was. I'm spending a lot of time talking to governments and large institutions about how all this stuff ought to get done. But it's taken me way, way back from the technical front lines. So all I can say to the teams working on that stuff is you're superheroes and good luck. And when the time comes to communicate that stuff, give me a shout and I'll try and explain it to people. But as we move towards that kind of scaling, it opens up an enormous set of new horizons for this kind of interpenetration between the real and the digital, the real and the virtual. And that pulling together of the real and the virtual into this kind of tighter, harmonious whole, to me seems to be the sort of primary output that we get from a scaled blockchain. You finally have, in theory, enough computing capacity to be able to track individual rides in cars, individual renting of rooms, individual assets and supply chains, not general structural understandings, and not isolated private chains which are, you know, incredibly quick, but you can't really connect assets across those chains in an easy way yet. And moving towards that kind of system where you can see the entire world reflected in the digital in a single coherent surface, even small steps towards that vision, I think people will find incredibly inspiring. And the natural sort of template for that is what happened to geography with maps. Once you had an efficient digital mapping system so you could look on Google Earth and you could really understand what the world was and how it worked, it brought us into a much deeper understanding of how everything fits together. And I think that there's a really good chance that, you know, future versions of Ethereum and descendant systems will have the ability to do the same thing for commerce, for travel, for the ownership of goods, so that it's possible to really zoom back and look at the world with the blockchain mapped to the geography, with the institutions kind of visible as actors, so you can see which accounts are attached to, for example, a bank, and you can get an overview of how the system as a whole works. That sounds very visionary today, but seeing how fast we've gone in the last year, I don't think that's an unrealistic vision of the future. It might be ambitious, but I don't think ambitious is unrealistic anymore. We've kind of proven our mettle, It's here, and here we go. So I wish you all a very happy and successful conference. I hope you have a fantastic time in New York, and I will see you in Cancun. Take care.